Welcome to the Unreal Engine launcher. Here you're looking at my desktop, my messy desktop, and the launcher itself. And to get to Unreal Engine, all you need to do is make sure you go to the Unreal Engine tab here on the left, and then in the library set you can install additional versions and launch from the versions you do have here at the top. Farther down you'll find projects you already have, and then you'll find your asset library. You'll see I have a bunch because I've been collecting the free ones every month for a while, but I'll go over the other places in the marketplace in later videos, but I'm actually just going to go ahead and launch it directly. So I just click the launch button, and it'll take a second to launch. So it took a while for that to launch, and if you haven't launched in a version yet, or it's your first time opening Unreal, it even takes longer because it has to comp that, so just be patient. Once you're greeted with this screen, what we're actually going to do is just create an empty games project. So I'll just click on games, and here you'll see that there are a number of different templates you can pick from. For this example, I think it'll be good for us to start with something that's slightly playable. You'll see that obviously there's templates for VR, AR, cars, and other vehicles, etc. We're actually just going to do the third person template. I think this is a good one to get a feel for the engine. And over here, let's leave it set to blueprint, desktop, maximum, and let's make sure the starter content is on. We do not need ray tracing on. You can always activate this later if you end up using this same project for your own stuff and you want to render video that's really fancy out, but you don't have to do that. The only other thing to note is here is where it will be saved. And it's important to remember, this is important because these files get huge. On this computer I actually have two separate hard drives in, and I have this saved onto my larger hard drive, my D drive, as opposed to the C drive. Other specifics around that aren't super important, just know that it will take up a lot of space. And then here you name what your project is going to be. I'm going to name mine UE5 demo. And then once you've named it, you can hit create. And again, this will take a second, and it will take even longer if you haven't opened it before. So here the third person template file has opened. Before we really dive in, I'm going to give you a bit of an interface tour and help you navigate the new digital space of Unreal Engine 5 that we're going to be working in. So firstly, let's talk about moving in this viewport. It'll be a little bit different from other software you're used to. For the most part, you'll move around it like a video game. If you hold right click on the mouse, you can drag the camera around, and then if you use the W, A, D, and S key, you can fly, much like you're in a video game. If you press Q and E, you'll go down and up, but you can really fly around it very much like you're controlling a first-person camera in a video game. Now, you can also left-click and hold to do this, but you'll find that it restricts your freedom a bit more if you do the left-click. Similarly, you can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. I don't really recommend doing this because it will be very limited. Actually, the better way to do that is to hold right-click and press the W key to move forward. Now, if you come up to the top, you can increase and decrease the camera speed here. Go to the top right. So if you really increase it and hold the right click and move, you zoom straight through with just a single press of the button. But it'll be much more comfortable for this smaller scale scene to move at a slower speed. It's important to know that while you're moving, if you use the scroll wheel forward, you'll speed up, and if you use it down, you will slow down a bit, so you can get some more fine-tuned control that way. Now, before we move on, I'll go briefly over the central viewport here, which has a number of bells and whistles that are useful for us. Up here in the top left, you'll find a hamburger menu that has a number of different commands. We will be accessing these quite a lot. Now, this is where you create your cameras, and you can go into game view from here if you can't remember the shortcuts, and this is also where you will take screenshots from. So it's a very handy menu to know about. When you have more cameras in the scene, if you mouse over where it says perspective here, the new cameras will actually appear in this list. And so this will be where you swap viewpoints from. You can also go to orthographic views, but I do not recommend you actually use those. Now, in the view modes here, you'll see that they have a number of pre-made lighting conditions. And if you swap through them, you'll see that the viewport changes quite drastically, and it's showing you different types of data which can be useful for making games. Now, for the most part, you'll probably stay in lit. If your scene gets very, very heavy with lighting and a lot of fancy things in it, you might go to unlit, which will make it run more smoothly. But in general, we'll stay in lit mode. Now, this is another tooltip shower, so you can show different datas in the scene, but I will just usually leave these on the default. And then here is your engine scalability. If you're having performance issues, you can lower the quality settings, the visuals here. And it's important to know that this only affects what you see in the viewport. If you go to render through the video pipeline, you can control this on the tail end as well. So you could be working at a lower resolution and then export out at the highest resolution, which is the cinematic quality. And then in the top right, you'll see a number of commands. These are all standard movement and transform controls that you'll find in most 3D software. How you move things in Unreal is actually, you can just click on them and then a gumball appears and you can just drag them around. I'll get into more specifics around this as we go, but in general, that's going to be how you move things. If you press the E key, or alternatively, you can go up here and click this rotate button, a rotation gumball appears. Here you'll see that it is snapping to the rotation. This is because there is a 10-degree angle snap activated. You can swap this to 90 degrees, or you can turn it off by clicking this and making it gray, and now it can freeform rotate. Similarly, for the movement, this is actually a grid movement, and it's set to 10-degree increments. Now, if I turn that on and decide to move this, you'll see that it starts to snap to the grid, which can be pretty useful for organizing things, especially if they're modular pieces like these that are walls. So here you'll see that they are even aligning perfectly to that grid in the bottom left corner, which I'll put in the center. Similarly, there is an R button control here to scale things. So to scale, again, you can just click on them with the scale tool activated and a gumball will appear. You of course can scale them in one direction at a time, and if you want to switch between global and local coordinates, you can click on this button here, which you'll see as I'm on the move tool and swapping. Here is oriented in the direction of the object, and if I click here, it is oriented to the world. This is more important for scaling because if you have it oriented to the object and scale, it will scale uniformly in directions. But if we have it set to well, it looks like they've locked that. I do find it quite useful to turn off the snaps, and I usually don't use the grid snaps, but of course you can use that to your heart's content. Now, you'll notice that there are a few different objects in the scene as well, and these are indicated by these icons here. And there is a game controller icon here, which comes in immediately if we want to play the scene that we have set. So this comes with a default template scene built. If you come up here and hit this green play button, you will be put into it as a playable character. And any changes that you have made will be placed there, but I'm just controlling with the W, A, S, and D keys. You press spacebar to jump. So it's standard Epic Games controller setup. You can also plug in a game controller and play with this immediately if you so desire. Now, with this object selected, it's where we're going to go over to the right side of the screen now to the outliner. which is this window up here in the top right, which is very similar to the Blender outliner. This is where it contains all of the objects in the scene. And similar to Blender, there's not really a layers system in the same way that you would be used to in something like Rhino. Instead, you use folders. And so you'll find that in this level, a number of the objects are grouped into folders. So if I zoom out a bit, I can hide objects in the viewport by even just hiding the folders that they are placed in. Now this is important to know that this only hides it in the viewport. If I hit play, they will still exist, and if you hit the render video tab, they will also still exist, but you can hide them from the viewport by clicking this. Now you'll see with this highlighted that this is a player start. So actually in this case, if I move this object over here, I'll press E and swap to rotate, and I'll rotate it around. Now if I hit play, I am now starting over here on this side. So you can actually move that around in the same way that you can move other things around. And it can be kind of fun to just move things lightly and see how you have now altered the world, and I have made this an incompletable tower to scale. It's too high up. But you can play around with that quite a lot. You'll see a few things as you're playing in the viewport that are quite different from much other software. Notably, this has shadows that are updating in real time as I move things. This is really where it starts to showcase what it means when it says it is real-time rendering. Because in Unreal, what you see is what you get. The scenes will basically look like they are going to render out as long as you're at your max scalability settings. And I think that's pretty nice. You can actually even directly alter the lighting by going into here. They have a lighting folder, and you can manipulate some of these different components, which are also indicated by these icons here in the scene. The only light in the scene right now is a directional light, which will actually segue perfectly into the next window for us to take a look at, which I'm just dragging up here with the arrow key. And I have the directional light selected, and here you'll see the different details for that directional light. At the top you have the transform controls, which is standard for any object you select. You'll see that that's the same kind of data that is present here, which this starts to actually include some rotational data for this sun object. So I can rotate it in the same way I can rotate any other object actually, and if I do that, you can see what's happening in the scene directly. All the lighting is updating in real time. But you can also change that here in the transform controls. So you could type in, for example, a specific rotation to like 270 or something like that. But if you scroll down below that is where you'll start to find more interesting controls that are going to be specific to the specific object you have selected. So for example here, I have this actor selected, this cube actor, which then will tell me what mesh it is and what material it is. If I go into the sun, instead the data here is including data about the sun, specifically stuff like the source angle, which is kind of the softness of the light, the temperature, the color temperature of that sun, which I can slide up and down freely, and a number of other things like the intensity, if you have it casting shadows or not, and here of course is the brightness of it listed by intensity. If you do volumetric scattering, that'll come in more specifically with the fog actor, but the other fun thing to mess around with would be the light color. If I click on this, it will bring up a color picker, and I can immediately change the scene to whatever strange or unworldly color I would like. If I want to keep it, I can click OK. If I do not, I can click cancel. I'll click OK here just to show you that there's one other really handy feature. You'll notice as I'm changing values in these data fields, this little reset button appears. So if I decide I'm not happy with pink and I want it to be the previous color, I can actually click this button and it now has reset it to a natural white, only taking color from the light color temperature. We will get into this more specifically for specific things as we are clicking on them and manipulating them in the scene, but for now we'll leave it there. Which brings us to one of the final pieces to talk about, which is the most important window to look at. This is the content browser, which is down here at the bottom. You have a few ways that you can access this. If by default you don't see it appearing, it may be popping up or some other setting, you can go in here and you can have it unlocked or locked and other things, but I usually will just drag this window and store it down here at the bottom, which is all I've done. And you can do that with, you can actually rearrange the viewport freely by just dragging any of these around if you want. I'm going to leave them all in their default positions though, because I find it very useful to do that. But this content browser at the bottom is basically all the folder content of everything you have in the project. So for example, there's the mannequins for the characters that you can play as are all stored in here. You'll also find I added the starter content, which comes with a number of props and shapes preloaded that we can play around with, and I'll use some of that here shortly. And of course it has some materials that you can already just drag and drop into the level. Now this is going to be the case for any of this stuff. You can actually drag and drop anything from here into the level, which is how the Unreal Engine works. It's very similar to The Sims or any other drag and drop play system that you might have experienced before. And you know, I can really quickly make a huge mess. Before I move on to the next bit, I'll actually show you how to reset this easily. Of course I could Control Z to undo things I've changed, but if I want to change this floor back to the original gridded material, because this one's obviously stretched here, an easy way to do that would be to select something else that has that material, go over here to the details, and if I click this little folder magnifying glass, it will take me to the location of that asset. You can also do that for any of the objects that you have in the scene. It will, if you click on these little magnifying glasses, it will open the folder that they are stored in, which is super handy if you get lost or just need to find a folder. You know that there's also a chair in the same folder as the couch, for example. But this folder structure will grow. If you add asset packs or other things in, they will all be in this folder structure here for you to drag and drop into your scene. Now the last thing that I'm going to go over in this video is actually just here at the top. So there are a number of modes that you can switch between in Unreal, and it's placed similarly to Blender. For the most part we will stay in select mode. Later on in this tutorial set though, I will show you briefly the foliage tools. It may be in the next tutorial set though actually. Similarly, you'll have a number of settings and kind of reset options up here in the top as normally most software. Most importantly, you will find the project settings, the editor preferences, and plugins here under the Edit tab. If your Unreal setup gets a little crazy, you can actually go into the layouts and reset your window layouts here. So if you lose a window or can't find something, you can activate those in the Windows tab. The rest of the stuff won't really come in too much. Overall, that takes us to the end of our interface tour. From here we'll jump straight into using some of these different features, specifically levels. You may notice in future videos that I'm referencing a window over here on the left called the Place Actors tab. And to get that onto your interface, you can go up here to Window and say Place Actors. This will add this tab over here, which I think is quite handy when you're getting started because it will have a lot of basic objects like your lights and shapes, etc. So you may find it useful to add this. And the rest of the videos are taken in Unreal Engine 4, and this was part of the default layout in Unreal Engine 4.